So hi, good morning. Welcome to this golden thread of foundational community supports, the fifth of our six-part training series. And today we're going to talk about interventions or services in foundational community supports for both supported employment and supportive housing. My name is Shelley Bookbinder, and this is my second training that I'm doing for this training series. I also presented on assessment in the second training. I'm here with my colleague, Earl Leach, who will be on chat and available if you have any questions. We're both from the Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. We've been contracted by the Washington State Healthcare Authority to provide these trainings. So we're in New Jersey. It's 12:30 here, very hot. I don't know if you guys are in the midst of a May heat wave, but we are a little bit here. So we've been contracted to provide these trainings. A few training basics. We've been going over this each training, but it's good just as a reminder. So in terms of audio and video, please connect audio and remember to mute your audio. You can use your computer audio or call in. The number is here on the slide. It's also in the email that you got as a reminder from Zoom, probably last night, this morning. Please remember to stay muted to keep down background noise. This is a meeting because we wanted to have participation, so just please make sure to keep yourself muted. You can choose to have your video on or off, but again, please make sure if you share your video to have appropriate dress and background. And we do reserve the right to mute you if there's something distracting, both in terms of audio or video. To ask or respond to a question, we ask that you use chat. If there's something that you would really like to say, feel free to unmute yourself, but we're going to primarily use chat. And also, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and presentation will be sent out by the Healthcare Authority of Washington State. However, I'm going to ask my colleague Earl to put today's presentation into the chat if for any reason you'd like to view or download it now. So Lisa, thank you so much. Earl is going to put today's PowerPoint in the chat so you can view it, download it. It's shared on a program we use called Box. There it is. So Lisa, that link that Earl just put into the chat is the presentation, and we'll share it again at the end. And additionally, a recording of this, since I'm recording, and also the presentation will be sent out probably within a week by the Healthcare Authority of Washington State. Okay, so as a reminder, this is part of a six-part training series on 6 consecutive Thursdays. Each of the trainings is 6 hours. We've already had 4 trainings. We started by talking about the golden thread, that tying together of documentation. And since then, we've been going through different pieces of that golden thread. So starting with the assessment process, prioritizing need and goals that come out of those needs, and then breaking those goals down into different steps or objectives, and then turning the goal and objective into a SMART goal, which is a requirement of Medicaid and also a best practice for goal setting to have specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So today, we're going to we've been talking about goals and objectives, and now we're going to talk about interventions, which is the place in which staff provides services to support the meeting of objectives and goals. And then things are going to round out next week with Earl, who's going to be talking about intentional services and documenting those intentional services. So, thank you, Leslie, Carl, Susan, Karen. Absolutely feel free to chat with each other and to share where you're from. It is wonderful to see the diversity of types of agencies, locations, and something that I've loved about providing these trainings is the sense of community for people who haven't met each other, but are working with similar clientele, offering resources and other things like that. So it's really wonderful. Those of you sharing by chat. Heather, Kayla, really wonderful. A little bit about myself while all of you are introducing yourselves in the chat, which is very nice. Again, my name is Shelley Bookbinder, and I work for the Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric and Rehabilitation. And I've done that since 2019. And what I do with Emily and Earl is we provide training and technical assistance for supportive housing providers under a Medicaid fee-for-service rehabilitation model, very similar to foundational community supports. And that's part of the reason that we do these trainings and we've been contracted, is because our program is a little bit more established, and this is our wheelhouse. It's what we do. My own background, I was a licensed social worker working in New York City, and I also taught at Queens College. I teach at the Rutgers School of Social Work, and so I have quite a teaching background, training background. I used to do psychoeducation trainings for people in shelter, moving into housing. And so a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today focus on teaching and training with the hope of imparting some best practices. So that is a little bit about me. And again, thank you for everyone who's sharing in the chat where you work. I see, Lisa, you're saying that you work for both supportive housing and supportive employment as a case manager. So really wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. So a review of session 4 last week that my colleague Emily hosted, and Earl is going to put into the chat the presentation for session 4 if anyone missed it. So the link that Earl's going to put in is for session 4. And Earl, if you can include in the chat also the name of the document so people can see what it is, that'd be wonderful. So in session 4 with Emily last week, we talked about SMART framework and goals and objectives. And again, the SMART framework comes from business from the 1980s. Oh, Chris, you're asking for session 3. I'm going to ask Earl after he puts this to find that. He needs to go and find that. But yeah, we're absolutely happy to put the session 3 presentation. Absolutely, Chris. And session 4 is in the chat. So what are SMART? What is the SMART framework? It's that goals and objectives are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And in assessing, is a goal or objective SMART, we have a few questions here. You know, was it specific to know what will change, right? Is it specifically laid out to know what is the target change? Can you measure if progress has been achieved or not? Was it attainable or relevant to the individual? That's quite individualized. And was it time-bound? And so I have a couple examples that I'm going to put in a poll, and I want you to let me know if you think they're SMART. So hold on one moment. Okay, so I've got 2 goals by poll. Is the goal I will buy a house in the next 6 months SMART? That's the first question. And the second is the goal I will be healthier in the next 6 months SMART? We've got yes, almost there, needs a little work, or no. And Earl put, thank you so much, Earl, the session 3 presentation in the chat, if anybody missed that. Thank you so much, Earl. So take a moment to complete this. And while people are doing the poll, I'm going to also ask, did anybody review or write a SMART goal or objective this week that you want to share? And you can do that by the chat. Oh, wonderful, Chris. Glad that that's helpful. Did anyone write or review something or have a question about something related to SMART? You can put that in the chat while people are doing the poll. So I'm going to just take another 10 seconds if anyone else wants to complete the poll. So again, is the goal I will buy a house in the next 6 months SMART? And is the goal I will be healthier in the next 6 months SMART? Okay, so I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. Wonderful. So for the first goal, I'll buy a house in the next 6 months. About 2/3 of people said yes. Another third said almost there or no. And I agree that it could absolutely be more specific. But right, there's a sense of what will change. The person will go from not owning a house to owning a house. There's a way to measure progress, right? Do you own a house or not own a house? The question, attainable, relevant, depends on the individual, but there is a time component. Now, the goal, I will be healthier in the next 6 months, is about the opposite. So a little under 2/3 said it needs a little work, and about 1/3 said yes, Oh, and about a fifth said no. So my percentages were a little off there. So what's a way that this could be made a little bit smarter? Does anyone have a suggestion for how to make this "I will be healthier" so that it's more specific and measurable? So Caitlin, a weight loss goal. Right, and weight loss goals, that's very much specific and you can tell whether it's achieved or not, right? Because it's, did you lose 10 pounds or didn't you lose 10 pounds? So that's a very good way to make it specific and measurable, absolutely. Stopping to smoke, are you smoking or not smoking? Quit smoking. Ooh, a lot of people put things in. Eat vegetables, saying how often you'll eat vegetables. Walking 3 miles, did you walk 3 miles or not? Absolutely. I see that eat better, right? The question is like how to measure that and to show whether someone's eating better or not. A lower blood pressure, also numerical. That's something that can be easily, if that's a goal for someone. Get better sleep. Well, Lisa, I'd ask you, how do you measure better sleep? Is it based on how many hours someone's sleeping? Is there some type of measurement for rapid eye movement sleep? Right? How is that being measured? Oh, sleep hours, L. Absolutely, that's a way to make that measurable. How many times the person gets up? Amy, yeah. So that could be something if there's like interrupted sleep and that's the concern, if it's the number of hours, it really does depend on the individual. Hours and quality. So 2 different measures there. Absolutely, and all of these things, you can go in many directions: eating, sleeping, walking, blood pressure, weight, and that really does depend on what is going to be motivating for the individual. So I'm going to stop sharing those results. Wearing a Fitbit, right? And exactly, and it matters if the person has a Fitbit. So resources come into play there in terms of what's attainable for the individual. Which is why it's sometimes hard to talk about, are things smart for people, because it depends on the person. Because for a lot of people, buying a house is not, attainable at this point, but could be in the future. So did anybody, yeah, Jess, so mentally or physically in any way, right? It could also be in terms of financially. Is it financially possible? For Jess, in terms of physicality of losing weight, right? Is that a healthy, is it possible, right? Is it too much weight too quickly? Very, very important. So Susan, being more specific as to what healthier means, does it have to be physical? Oh, no, it doesn't have to be physical. It could absolutely be in terms of, it could be emotional, it depends on how the person defines being healthier. Being healthier might be being more social, right? Because it could be about emotional wellness. It absolutely doesn't have to be a physical health goal. It really does depend, and which is why discussing and kind of teasing things out is so important. Because it could mean a lot of different things to people and at different times. So that's a great question, Susan. So does anybody have a SMART goal or objective that you reviewed or wrote this week? Did anyone have any other questions about SMART and kind of turning goals SMART? Because what we found in New Jersey is that oftentimes people work backwards. They have something specific they want to do with an individual, like a budget, like a weight loss goal. And it's hard for people to see like what the larger goal, what the thing the person wants is, which is really important, which is why we started by talking about person-centered planning and rehabilitation services, because it is so important that the individual is on board and it's really the goal that the person wants, right? So if the person doesn't want to lose weight, but that's the goal, that's not going to be motivating for the individual. So did anyone have any questions about goals versus objectives, how to make a goal SMART, just before we move on? I just wanted to check in. I know that you worked on that last week with Emily. Okay. Well, thank you all for participating and sharing. The PowerPoint is in the chat, or I'll put that a little bit earlier if you scroll back. And I do want to highlight that you can download at the end of this, the chat, if you want to save it. It's the 3 dots on the side of the chat. So if you don't get everything and want to check back later, you can definitely download that. Okay. So the learning objectives for today, again, we're moving from goals and objectives to interventions, a topic that I would love to discuss. So first, we're going to talk about types of interventions. So the types of interventions done in supportive housing and supported employment. You learned something new with the dots, Lisa. Yeah, and Zoom is changing all the time. I honestly didn't even know about the subtitling. So I just learned about it this week and I'm very happy I did. So yeah, wonderful to teach something new because we use it all the time, but they add functions and you don't always know about it. So we're going to talk about types of interventions and then methods to provide those interventions. And so we're going to talk about 4 evidence-supported practices or empirically supported practices. Tell, show, do for skills teaching, and that comes out of skills teaching for people with schizophrenia, but is used more broadly for people with serious mental illness. And then motivational enhancements, that comes out of motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral techniques. Those are applied techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, and then illness management and recovery. And we're going to talk a little bit about the SAMHSA toolkit. So does anyone have any questions before we get into the content? Okay. So I'm going to start with a poll about your relationship to interventions and services. So I'm going to ask you about, do you write interventions on individualized service plans or ISPs? Or do you teach client skills? Yes, no, unsure, or it's just not applicable. It's not part of your role. So do you write interventions? Do you teach skills? And part of the reason we're focusing on skills so much, and we're going to do a lot with skills, is because of some of the conditions under which people have lived in institutionalized settings with chronic homelessness. Independent living skills are something that people need to be able to find and maintain living, apartments, and then also employment in the community. So we're going to focus quite a bit on skills teaching. So just take another 10 seconds if anyone else would like to do the poll. It's wonderful to see who everyone is and what we do. Earl, thank you so much for pointing out. I just changed this right before the training. So instead of services on the slide, it says, that isn't even a word. It should say services. I'll correct that before it's sent out. Thank you, Earl. Last minute changes. Always dangerous. Okay, so I'm going to end polling now. Wonderful. Okay, so about 2/3 of you said that yes, you write interventions, and then the remainder, no, are not applicable. It's not part of your job. And then do you teach client skills? Wow, over 80% yes. And then a couple people, no, unsure, or not applicable. Great, so we're going to be talking both about the writing of skills and then the writing of interventions for plans, and then also how to provide those services. So it should be applicable to most of you. And if you're not teaching skills writing interventions, you may be supervising people who are. So I hope that this is highly applied. So this is the golden thread model that we've been using. And we started with engagement and assessment, and now where we are is developing the individualized service plan and providing services. So that development includes goals and objectives, but we're going to focus today on interventions and then providing those services. And Earl next week is going to talk about a little bit more specifically, what does it mean to have intentional services? Those are services that are laid out on a plan in advance of going to provide them. The service plan components. So we are going to talk about interventions today, but last week it was shared that we need to talk more about the components, including the problem statement. And so I'm going to just talk very briefly about the service plan components for the ISP, and Earl is going to put this diagram into the chat if anybody finds it helpful. So the problem statement, so thinking about a service plan, you start with a problem, right? And it could start with, this is in no way a template, but this is something that can guide if you're looking for a format for the service plan. So it could be due to the symptoms of schizophrenia that contributed to long-term hospitalization and, unstable housing in the community. A goal could be to find and maintain. They would like to find and maintain stable housing in the community. And an objective, in the next 6 months, the client will apply to an apartment. And then the intervention, the thing we're going to talk about today, is the staff will meet with the client, let's say once a week, to, right, what could somebody do in order to help somebody apply for apartments? And that's what we're going to talk about today, different practices to help people build skills and then also attached to resources, right? So there might be skills around resume writing, there might be technological skills about submitting applications, perhaps searching for apartments, communication skills to contact people about apartments. So all of those things might be needed. And again, it of course depends on the individual. So these are the service plan components, and I'll put that in the chat. It's this diagram. So that was a follow-up from last week. So I know there was a discussion about the role of the problem statement. If anyone has any questions, please put in the chat. So intervention development. So in thinking about, you have the goal and objective, and that's carried over from the assessment, the goal, and then broken down using the KSR, knowledge, skills, and resources process. And then thinking about what are you going to write for staff to do for those of you who write the ISPs. So questions to ask when writing interventions, right? How would the interventions support the client's goal achievement, right? Because if the client has a goal, how are you going to individualize that to support the client's goal, right? And just because clients have the same goals, they may not need the same interventions or services. So what skills need to be taught or practiced, right? So some people might need entirely new skills, things that are new to them, and some people just might need to practice or build on skills that they have that are existing skills. Also, what resources need to be acquired, right? And resources, it's not just financial. People can be resources, family members, friends, references if someone's looking for a job are very important resources. Other types of resources could be, for example, benefits. Being mindful of transferable skills. Okay, Jeffrey, so you provide the interventions going back to the plan, but also how to create an agenda to stay on task. So you create an agenda for yourself to stay on task when you're actually providing those services. That's a really helpful thing to know. So Amy, other types of resources, social groups, the internet, library, community groups, absolutely. So resources in the community, being in a place with public transit is a huge resource. A park, right? So many different things in the community, people, places, these are all resources. That allow people to do things to achieve goals, absolutely, to find enjoyment, pleasure, to have a higher quality of life. So if I were to ask what's needed for a goal to get to all of one's appointments on time, right? These could be any type of appointments, medical appointments, perhaps job interviews, right? What's needed for somebody to be able to get to all their appointments on time? What skills, what resources? Thank you for sharing those. Oh, okay, Kimberly, an alarm on a phone. Absolutely, having an alarm. So a reminder, kind of thinking about scheduling, calendar, people are on the same track. Preparing clothes for the next day, setting an alarm, access to transportation. Absolutely, transportation. People are really on, so kind of getting people a calendar, knowing when the appointments are, and then physically getting there. Proper sleep, yeah, going back to being healthier, having sleep, both time and quality of sleep. Reminder calls, Lisa. could absolutely be helpful. So picking up, a number of you mentioned transportation. You set reminders, Darren, you set reminders for clients, apps for maps, transportation, Chris. And so if you're thinking about transportation, right, what are different skills and resources people might need for transportation? Reliable transportation. Yeah, Michael, I really appreciate that. So many people are saying transportation, and that was the thing where my mind went as well. How to get their bus pass. Absolutely. So that kind of how, where do they go? Is it something they can get online? A bus schedule, how to read a transit schedule. It can be very confusing. Absolutely. Is it online? Is it paper? Where do they get the paper? What do they need to know if their ride falls through? A fail-safe? Absolutely. And that's whether you're getting a ride for somebody or public transit. Has anybody waited for a bus that just doesn't show up? It happens, right? It's happened to me quite a bit before. Now, right now, the buses, I don't really take a bus anymore, but I used to every day, and they just don't show up sometimes. Yeah, Lisa, finding transportation in rural Washington is hard. Yeah, that's a resource that isn't available to people. Cameron, can they read to figure out the stops? Do they have a watch so they know what time it is? Right, absolutely. Knowing where the stops are, knowing how to communicate with somebody to ask, oh, wait, is this my stop? Maybe they're going to a place they haven't gone before and need a transfer. So absolutely, it's so many different skills and resources. And that fare card, having money for the fare card, these are all different things. So thinking about, right, if you're in rural Washington, it's entirely possible that there isn't a bus system. So thinking about the resources, how you tailor those interventions are gonna matter, what resources are available to somebody, what needs somebody has, the knowledge and skills. And so some of these things might take a long time, right? And public transit can be very complicated when somebody hasn't taken it before. And so thinking about, is that even an option? Is there some type of accessible ride system? That also depends on where you are. Is there somebody they can get a ride from? All of those things. So Alan, you're asking about the PDF from today. It was put in the chat earlier, but we're gonna put it in again. So you're absolutely gonna get the chat from today. So Amy, people depend on paratransit in rural Washington, and sometimes paratransit just doesn't have drivers and they don't pick up their clients for appointments. It's tough, and then the clients miss appointments. I try to come with a game plan. The ride falls with specialty arrangements are hard to get. Absolutely, and I think that's really important. And some of those coping skills, and that's where like you think you can have a plan, coping, communication, figuring out what's going on, knowing how long to wait before you try to do something else. Those are all really important coping and communication skills, because that can absolutely happen and it's incredibly frustrating. So Jeffrey, given the housing moratorium in place, it's very difficult to find housing. So to teach my participants other useful skills, how to create an agenda, how to interact with participants. Okay. So, okay, yeah. So it's sounding like you're using other skills, preparing people to get ready for apartments, even though they might not be able to apply or move in. That's absolutely good to know. So Ronnie asking a patient what's worked for them in the past and tailoring a plan for skills they already have. Absolutely. So starting where they are, which is always a great thing because people are not starting from scratch, right? Do they have experience reading charts, even if it's not a schedule, right? Do people understand basically a grid system and reading that? Like people, again, are not starting from scratch, even though they may not have used public transit. Okay, so those are all very important things to consider. And in thinking about rehabilitation services, most interventions, so the services that are being provided, in addition to being tailored, of course, to the individual, to the resources available, they should improve or restore functioning. And so this means improving or restoring functioning in chosen environments. So for example, if finding transportation, whether it's paratransit or a public bus if available, that's going to allow somebody to, for example, find independence in their medical appointments, find independence in terms of being able to apply for, maintain a job again, if they haven't had a job for a while or a job for the first time. And so improve or restore functioning. It's also aimed at doing with over doing for, right? And so thinking about doing with or doing for, the model of supportive housing in New Jersey and in most of the country was to do for, right? To drive people to pick up food. And so the case management model prior to rehabilitation, prior to a program like Foundational Community Supports, was focused on doing for. The model of rehabilitation to improve or restore functioning is to help people by doing things with them as opposed to doing things for them. And helping someone to ride the bus as opposed to driving somebody is that model of doing with over doing for. And it's important in part because Medicaid, which is the funder of FCS, doesn't pay for transportation, right? So it doesn't pay for the time spent to drive someone. Yeah, Jeffrey, I really appreciate that point you brought up about people having different types of skills. And when we talk about skills teaching, this is going to come up, that people have skills who, if they've been, rough living or unhoused, have very specific skills to survive. And those skills don't necessarily translate to independent living. So it seems that people have skill deficits, but I would say it's more of a skill mismatch for where they're living, because people absolutely have skills. It's that they're different from the ones they would need in an independent apartment. So that's a really wonderful point. I'm glad that you brought that up. And the last point I wanted to make is about teachable moments. And this came up, somebody mentioned this in the chat about unexpected occurrences, right, as teaching opportunities. And so what could be a teachable moment while taking public transportation? And so someone brought up, paratransit doesn't come, a bus doesn't come. How could that be a teachable moment? So take a moment to think about that. How could that be a teachable moment? I'm just going to say, as somebody who has taken a lot of public transit over the last 15 years, when buses don't come, okay, so Amy, you're saying about, right, contacting somebody, communication skills, like these kind of problem solving skills, if something doesn't happen instead of no showing, absolutely. They could reschedule their appointment, right? They could call their provider, they could call the agency, right? Some of that problem solving, okay, if the bus doesn't come by then, right, I'm not going to make the appointment. And so I need to figure out whether I can reschedule, whether they can see me later today, right? What's possible. So that's absolutely important problem solving skills. Breathing exercises, yeah, absolutely. Calming down, not going into panic. I've had some panic on buses when I really need to get somewhere and the bus just doesn't come, right? And so having those self-soothing, having those ability to calm oneself down so that you can work to do that problem solving. So Cameron, how to talk to the bus driver if your bus pass doesn't have money on it? Absolutely. Has that happened to anyone? You go there, you either don't, if you need exact change, you don't have it. I've had to ask people if they can break $1, if you have a bus system that you have to have exact change with quarters. It depends on the bus system. So that absolutely matters in terms of being able to communicate with people, the bus driver, other people, really important. Oh, so Ronnie, you're saying that Medicaid does help with transportation to and from doctor's appointments by calling customer service. Yeah, so they're not going to reimburse you to do it. There are other ways they can help with transportation, but I'm just going to say, like, as part of FCS, it's not going to reimburse you to drive somebody. So thank you for that clarification, Ronnie. And Alan's saying, please don't put cans in the microwave. I think I missed that earlier, but if somebody said to put cans in the microwave, cans should not be in the microwave, absolutely. So Jan, you could actively practice what to say, practice grounding skills right there and then. Yeah, so there's lots of different teachable moments if you're with somebody on public transit and something unexpected happens. You don't have money. Sometimes things happen where people are loud or pushy, especially during rush hour on buses. So those are all really good skills and things that people can learn. Yeah. So FCS interventions, types and methods. So again, types of skills, these are pre and post tenancy skills for supported employment, for supported housing, and job search and sustaining skills for supported employment, and then also accompanying ADL skills and resources. And then methods we're going to go into after we talk about types. And these are, again, empirically supported methods to actually carry those interventions out. So supported employment services. I'm not going to talk about this so much, but there are both pre-employment services and employment sustaining services. And I want you to take a look if you provide supported employment services. Some of you mentioned in the chat that you do. Are there any up here that you generally provide, a service that you commonly provide, or is there a service up here that isn't up here that you provide quite a bit in supported employment? So just take a moment to look at these. Again, these are categories of services. So any service up here that you provide commonly, or a service that you do generally provide, but that isn't up here. Again, this comes from a manual on foundational community support services. It's not exhaustive, so there are absolutely services that you can provide that are not up here, but these are examples of types of services. Right, so employment planning, job development and placement, transportation, with the delivery of an authorized service, resume writing. Lisa, absolutely. Which could be part of job development, person-centered planning. Help with clothing with proper job interviews. Absolutely. Referral to WorkSource, so referrals to community and social support services, absolutely, which could probably help with interview role playing. That could help with issues around having work clothing and other resources needed to be job ready, talking with employers about programs and employers' needs. Help identify needs and providing referrals to all those services as needed. IDs, absolutely, benefits, education and planning, so helping getting ID and social security card to be able to be work ready. Absolutely. An elevator pitch, I like that. Thank you, Jeffrey. So in terms of supportive housing services, so for those of you who provide supportive housing, there are pre-tenancy and post-tenancy skills or services. And so what's a common supportive housing service you provide if you provide supportive housing? So we have landlord liaising, benefit support, financial literacy. Absolutely, appropriate clothing for interviewing is incredibly important. So Darren, you have connecting to resources in the community. Getting reasonable accommodations, Ronnie, absolutely, very important. And actually, I had a student this semester who was a social work student who didn't have an accommodation for a temporary disability. And I spoke with that student about getting an accommodation. So it's really important to know who to ask, how to ask. Really important. Coordinating with mental health providers and medical providers, using role play to prepare for an interview. So lots of different types of services around benefits, around preparation. Oh, so Richard, you have places for people to live if they need housing. So it sounds like you have some type of transitional housing that you can refer people to while they're waiting to move into an apartment. That's a really wonderful service. Okay, so Darren, you work in a supportive housing unit. Okay. Wonderful. So these are, again, the pre-tenancy, post-tenancy, job search, job sustaining. All of these are services provided under foundational community supports. Oh, Ronnie, yeah, being sure that the housing fits the needs of the clients. And that's part of the assessment process, figuring out needs, if there are needs around mobility, location, anything like that. So that's part of the assessment process. That's really important to keep in mind. So Janelle, community resources like food banks and other things that people need for the apartment. Helping clients stay housed. Yeah, that's some of that post-tenancy work, Darren. Absolutely. So lots of different services for both supported employment and supportive housing. So these are the categories. I'm hearing some repetition in terms of the types of services provided, which is wonderful. So Jeffrey, you're mentioning budgeting worksheets, financial literacy, whether that be budgeting, whether that be about saving, all that kind of information to help people be able to manage money and then be able to pay rent, pay utilities to stay housed, to be able to move into housing and stay housed. So the methods of services interventions are what we're going to focus mostly on today. So the methods, as I mentioned, we're going to focus a lot on skills teaching, and over 80% of people who responded to the poll I put said that you do skills teaching, which is wonderful. I'm going to love to hear back from some of the things that you think are best practices. So we're going to talk a bunch about that. Then motivational enhancement strategies, cognitive behavioral techniques, and illness management and recovery. So these are the 4 areas, and I'm going to share some resources that you can use in order to provide those services. Okay. So tell, show, do skills teaching techniques. So tell, show, do is a method of skills teaching for adults. It's specifically targeted to people with a serious mental illness. It was developed, there's a citation at the bottom by Bella and colleagues for social skills training for people with schizophrenia. It's used more broadly for people with serious mental illnesses. And the reason why skills teaching, skills training is so important, and this was mentioned earlier in the chat, is because of the onset of mental illness is generally during adolescence, early adulthood. These are the times in which people would be starting to live independently, right? So starting to have jobs, living in congregate living, in apartments on their own. And so at that time, people may, instead of working towards independent living, maybe experiencing hospitalization, maybe experiencing group home living, maybe unhoused during periods of time, and that changes the type of skills that they have. And so moving into an apartment, moving into an employment situation may require a lot of skills that they didn't develop in institutions and being chronically homeless. And so this mismatch between the skills that people have and the skills that people need to live independently is why skills training is such a big component of rehabilitation services. It's also important to think about a lot of these skills, people may feel that their cohorts already have. And so that's something that can be really challenging, a stigma about needing to learn some of these skills that people assume that people have around, especially activities of daily living. And so it's really important to be respectful, but also to work using these steps, which breaks things down in a way that's been shown with evidence to help people learn the skills well and to be able to generalize it in their lives. So skills training, incredibly important. And again, it's not that people don't have skills, it's that the skills that people have may not be matched very well to independent living. So this is broken down into 8 steps. Has anyone heard of Tell, Show, Do before as a method or read social skills training for schizophrenia? Wonderful, Sasha. That's wonderful to hear. So this is going to be a bit of a review for you. I apologize. I'm going to also share. So Richard, no. So this may be a review, and I apologize, but is Dwayne, you've heard of it before. That's good. Jan, basic Montessori 3-period lesson. Okay, so you learned it in Montessori school. Ronnie, yes. So crawl, walk, run. Absolutely. So breaking things down in a way that you do it exactly, starting slowly, and then as the person builds experience, confidence. So Dwayne, you've always used it to learn, practice, and implement. So some people absolutely have this knowledge, which is great. So it's going to be a short review, and I'm going to share a tool with you that should help to use this method. So I'm going to go through this quickly unless people are saying that they don't know it. Just one person said no. I also, so Jan, I went to Montessori school just for pre-K and kindergarten. So I don't remember this exactly from preschool, but I can imagine it being compatible with the Montessori method. So it begins with the rationale for learning the skill. And again, this is done in collaboration with the individual and thinking about why it's important to learn a skill. So something, for example, like taking public transit, what's the rationale? It's hard, it's really hot, there's often not air conditioning in the summer, it's crowded, like why is the person going to, it's confusing, why is the person motivated to do it? So what's the rationale for learning it? Discuss and break down the steps of the skill. And this can be done, some people will talk about this, use existing steps. There's a lot of places online, especially with ADLs, that have a breakdown of steps or have videos demonstrating doing a skill. But it is important to break things down in a way that's understandable to the individual, both in terms of the language, in terms of the level of literacy. For some people, pictorial demonstrations are more helpful, or matching something with a video that matches audio and text, and something visual that could be helpful. So breaking those steps down in a way that the person understands and is at the level that the person needs. And so even if two people are doing budgeting or two people are riding public transit, they might need very different breakdowns of steps in terms of detail and how the steps are actually written out. And then using a model of the skill that has the same steps as the breakdown, and having that continuity between the steps and the modeling is really important, especially for somebody to learn a new skill that they don't have a lot of experience with. And so I'll just say, if you have a video of a skill, you want to make sure that you match your breakdown of steps to the video so they're not in contradiction with each other. Because you see that quite a bit where there's a video, it's a good video, but the steps are different than the one that you're teaching. And so that's something to look out for. Then you're going to ask the person to try the skill and provide positive and corrective feedback. So what went well, what looked good, and then what maybe needs to be changed or worked on. And then if needed, the person tries the skill again. Additional feedback if needed, and that can be practiced again and again, and then encourage the practicing of skills in the natural environment or homework. And that's incredibly important, and part of the reason we do the learning applications, right? If we just talk about the KSR, the knowledge, skills, and resources, and then never ask you to apply it, right? It's going to be harder for you to remember to use it, because it is important within, a few days of learning something to apply it, or a lot of the information is lost. So when skills teaching, which steps do you always use, or which steps do you often not use when you're skills teaching? I know that a number of you mentioned that you have quite a bit of experience with this, which is wonderful to hear. And so what steps do you always use, or what steps do you generally not use? Modeling, absolutely, Carlos. So important for someone to visualize. The first one, the rationale, so important, right? Why is it important to learn a skill? Because a lot of the skills people are learning are challenging, right? They might be challenging in terms of motor skills, in terms of physicality. It's hard to learn new skills, so having that rationale is really important. So maybe if one more person wants to. Okay, well, I'm gonna keep moving. So provide feedback in the form of open-ended questions to support self-efficacy during learning a skill. Yeah, and we're going to talk about, I have a tool around supporting the use of open-ended questions. Thank you for bringing that up. We'll talk about that and talk about motivational enhancements. Absolutely, thank you for sharing that in terms of a technique for feedback. So we have a skills teaching template, which is based on tell, show, do, where you tell someone, you break down the steps, you show them through modeling, and then they do by trying. Yeah, Lisa, absolutely, checking for understanding is really important. About the skills breakdown, all of that being collaborative and checking for understanding, really important, both with the skills breakdown and also with the modeling. So Earl's going to share the skills template in the chat. This is something, it's a Word document, it can be edited, but this is used by students in our program, by people in the field. And the idea is that it goes through all of these steps of tell, show, do, and it helps you do some planning. And it helps to make sure, because it's been found in evidence that using all of these steps is important for people to learn the skill, right? So having opportunities to practice with you, to practice on their own, to check back in, that positive and corrective feedback, all of that is important for learning the skill. And so it begins with an orientation to the skill, right? What will be taught? A list of the steps. So this has a space to break down the steps. A demonstration of the skill. How will the skill be demonstrated? And then practicing the skill, you can write down different role plays, real life situations, homework. And what this does is, if you can do parts of this, like the list of steps, the rationale with the individuals, it can be part of the outreach, but it can also be used as a record for the individual to keep, to do collaborative planning with the individual, to think about different role plays or practice opportunities. And it also keeps people on the same page if it's in someone's file. So if somebody's working on a skill, and let's say someone's on vacation, there's staff turnover, this keeps a record, again, because continuity is really important, especially at the early stages of skill teaching and learning a new skill. And so this keeps things, the person can have a copy, it can stay in the file. And it's also, you can take a look at it when you're working with someone else. It's a place to start, even though it needs to be individualized. So I hope that this is something helpful. We're going to ask you to practice with this next week if you have the opportunity, or to have a staff member practice with it. Does anyone have any questions about the skill teaching template? And again, it's a Word document. It can be edited, but it's a place to get started, both in collaborative planning and having a record. So any questions about the skill teaching template? Okay, I'll keep an eye on the chat. So modeling a skill. So this is a step of skill teaching, which is important. I'm going to model a skill right now. You can see enough. It's a little challenging. It's a little bit easier when things were in person. And so I'm going to model the skill. So I'm going to model a skill of how to remove gloves, right? And how to remove gloves, this came up a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, but it is a tool of infection control, used more broadly if someone's doing injections for themselves. If, let's say, somebody lives in a living situation and somebody needs, for example, bandaging to make sure that body fluids, blood isn't, transmitting infection, all of those type of things. So it can be very helpful as a tool of infection control. So I have the steps to remove gloves from the CDC here. And so I'm using an existing list of steps. The CDC, which Earl is going to put into the chat, actually includes visuals in addition to text. But I put the text here so it's larger, so it's visible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually demonstrate taking off gloves using the steps that are listed on the screen. And I want you to think about, while I'm doing this, what stands out about my demonstration, and is there anything missing, both in my demonstration and in the list of steps that are included. So to begin, I'm going to grasp the outside of the glove with my gloved hand. And that's because, right, the outside of the glove is what's dirty. I want to keep my actual skin free of what's outside of the glove. So I'm going to pull it off, turning my glove inside out, away from my body. Then I'm going to hold the glove that I just removed in my gloved hand. And then I'm going to take the second glove off by putting my hand inside the glove at the top of my wrist and turning the other glove inside out while pulling it away from my body. And so now the gloves are inside each other. And I'm going to dispose of the gloves by putting them over here and then cleaning my hands immediately. So what stands out about this demonstration, about the list of steps from the CDC? Was anything missing in terms of the way I demonstrated it? Again, it's a little challenging since we're remote. It doesn't say where to dispose of the gloves. I literally just threw it on the table next to me, right? What do I dispose of them? Do I put them on the ground? Do they need to go somewhere special if they have blood with medical waste? Dispose of the gloves, dispose of them safely, right? What does safely mean? So a little bit more detail with that. That's a great point, Kimberly. Right, it might need to be something around bio-waste if there's actually some type of fluid on it. And, do you have that ability to do that if you're at home, right? What setting are you in? Oh, I said hand instead of fingers. Thank you, Cameron. Yeah, so I misspoke. Absolutely. So Janelle, you're saying tying them off when you have them both, right? If there's anything on it to kind of keep it contained before you throw them away. That's also something that might be important. Absolutely. So right, I said something different than the list said, which is important. I want to stay consistent between what I'm saying and doing and what the list says. So I'm actually really appreciative that you said that, Cameron. So anyone else, are these detailed enough? Do you think that this is tailored enough to the audience? I think it might be designed for medical professionals. Any thoughts? What about clean your hands immediately? Is that descriptive enough? Richard, you're saying it's detailed enough? Right. And thinking about, right, clean your hands, dispose of the gloves, for some people that is sufficient, but for other people, right, what does it mean to clean your hands? Is it just running your hands under water? Is it using soap? Do you need more about like how to actually clean your hands using soap and water, you're saying, Susan? So Kimberly, you're saying the audience matters, right? So medical pros know this is enough if this is designed for medical pros, but for people who maybe aren't sure exactly, who don't have a lot of experience with different standards of hygiene, they might need more. And I think that's what's important. So there's a lot of things, especially around ADLs, that's available online, but it might not be targeted to the skill level, the use of the individuals you're working with. And so thinking about, right, can you take this and could you adapt it for use if you have people that are working on skills around using gloves and things like that? So Richard, you're mentioning sanitizer versus soap and water. That could have to do with someone's resources, right? Do they have sanitizer? Do they have access to soap and water where they are? Yeah, using soap and water and singing happy birthday twice over for 20. Yeah, hand washing is, I feel like hand washing has never been better than in this country since so much focus was on it over the last year, which is good. Hand washing is a wonderful infectious disease control. So this demonstration was meant to think about, right, what is the list, right? The continuity between the list, what I'm doing, how much detail is needed. And so taking those things into account, what I'm going to ask you to do now is to in breakout sessions, and please, if you're not going to participate in the breakout, that's okay, but we have a lot of content after, so please, I want people to keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is have you in a group, or if you want to on your own, write down a comprehensive breakdown of steps to brush your teeth, right, which is a common ADL. It's something that a lot of people need support around, and this is for someone with limited knowledge and experience. Limited knowledge and experience. So what you're going to do is after you finish the steps, discuss any disagreements about steps and have a person to type and share by chat. And what I want you to do is really think about, and Earl's going to put this in the chat, this activity which describes what I've just said here, and I need you to talk. I have a lot of people saying they're going to step away. That's okay. So for those of you who are going to be doing this, please open this breakout activity. It's not going to show up once we move into breakout rooms. So please open the activity. I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning. Again, if your audio doesn't work, if you want to work on it your own, that's completely fine. But I really want you to think about, right, who is this individual who has limited knowledge and experience? How much detail do they need? Where will they be doing this skill? Like really think about some of these things. So everyone open that activity. So you're going to write a comprehensive list of brushing your teeth, all the steps.
Where do you open the activity?
Oh, so it's in the chat. So if you go to the chat box, it's the link right in the chat box. Okay, absolutely. And someone said they're going to do it with a coworker. That's fine. If you want to do it with a coworker, if you want to work on your own, completely fine. So I want to make this as useful. Some people love the breakout sessions. Some people get a lot from them. For other people, they don't. So definitely want it to be helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms of 5 or 6. Okay. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning. Okay. So again, you can work on it on your own with a colleague in the breakout rooms. If anybody needs anything, you can chat me, but again, we're going to work on a comprehensive list to brush your teeth. Okay. So I'm creating the rooms. I'm opening them. You should have an invitation, and I will see you in about 5 minutes. So I hope that those of you who are in breakout rooms had a good, short, but productive conversation. And so I'd like to see if anybody feels comfortable sharing in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and share, what were the steps that you had to brush your teeth? So I'll have a couple people share. And if anyone wants to also comment on the differences or any disagreements that you had in terms of the way that you broke things down. Did anybody have different methods of brushing teeth? Okay, so take a moment if anybody would like to share steps and or how the process was of thinking about and discussing. So what I'm going to do while people are maybe thinking about it, I'm going to share 2 lists of steps that are existing that I found online, because using existing steps is very common. And so the first is written steps. And this is from Colgate. So this breaks down brushing teeth into 5 steps, and these are 5 written steps. And then this is 5 steps from dentalcare.com. And these are steps done with pictures. So 2 different ways of breaking steps. And I want you to think about, right, how are these similar or different? Is this, ooh, I've got some in the chat, which is great. I see 12 steps here. Pick up the toothpaste, unscrew the top. Okay, so breaking that down. A circular motion in a quadrant for 30 seconds, front, upper, back. Okay, so you're talking about the motion, the amount of time, and then breaking it into quadrants. So Kimberly, so the choosing of the items, using the brush end of the toothbrush, you're being specific about what end of the toothbrush. So that's important information about how the toothbrush is actually positioned. Focusing on every tooth. Okay, Kimberly, a little bit different. So Anna, squeezing the toothpaste and the brush in one hand. So you're focusing on the cap back on the toothpaste, right? So that piece of its circular motions. Also focusing on timing and rinsing. So Andrea. We've got quite a bit of rinsing here. Yeah, rinsing isn't really mentioned. Timing is, but not rinsing in the steps that I've showed you here. So Andrew, wet your toothbrush and apply your toothpaste. So you're specifying wet and then apply. It's saying that you can start wherever you want, brushing all the different sides of the tooth. Okay, Andrew, mentioning the saliva and that buildup of saliva. Okay, so that's a little bit different. So Andrew, you mentioned 2 minutes, which is the same that Colgate mentions. Really, you were doing yours with your child using my bathroom when there were several toothbrushes and toothpaste. That's interesting. Yeah, and the context matters, right? Is the person alone? Is there more than one toothbrush? I know growing up, like there used to be lots of toothbrushes, and sometimes like I couldn't quite remember which one. And then, you know, like thinking about, is it color coded? What if somebody moves your toothbrush? So the context absolutely matters. So about these lists versus your lists, right? Is there anything up here that you wish you'd included, or do you think that these lists are sufficient? So Natalie, it also remembers which steps the person may already know or remember on their own. Absolutely. And so for an individual who has some experience, talking about the end of the toothbrush might be not necessary. And so that's why breaking the steps down with someone is really important. So Kimberly, you forgot to brush your tongue. Absolutely. And so that's on the Colgate. But if you look, brushing your tongue is not included on the dental care, right? So the pictures don't include brushing the tongue, but Colgate does. Yeah, not a lot of people included brushing the tongue. So Heather, it might also matter whether the person has running water and a place to spit. That's really important. So resources, right? Is there running water? Are you using bottled water? Some places where, for example, there isn't clean water from the tap. I know in New Jersey, we've had issues with lead in water, right? And people use bottled water in some of the cities, right? And so thinking about, right, what resources do you have? What type of faucet? What type of toothpaste container, right? There's some that are more like a pump, some with a top that twists and you push, right? Like those type of things. So resources absolutely matters. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And thinking about, do you leave the water on the whole time? What if the sink is backed up and the sink would overflow if you left the water on for 2 minutes, right? It really depends on where the person is going to be doing it. So Andrew, also the roof of the mouth, right? That's not necessarily included. Mm-hmm. There's some mentions here about the angle. Some people mentioned circular motions. So a little bit different from what people mentioned. Mm-hmm. So anything up here, either contrast or sit well with what you're doing. Is it helpful to see the pictures for something like toothbrushing? Do you generally use pictures or video when you're doing skills teaching? Oh, so Natalie, your group talked about the differences of using an electric toothbrush. This is another issue about resources, right? Is the person using, I guess it would be a manual toothbrush or an electric toothbrush? So Richard, you're saying that the pictures are helpful. I also, for something mechanical like this, pictures or a video is helpful for me. So Kimberly, you're saying if the person can't read, pictures are very helpful. Absolutely. Or maybe English isn't the first language and you don't have language appropriate staff to do translation, things like that. So Natalie, you're saying the pictures are helpful with the quadrants front and back. Yeah, showing the action. What does 45-degree angle mean, right? Like what is the actual angle against the gum line, right? For me, sometimes if I have angles and I'm not sure the direction, 3D rotation is not my strong suit. So, oh, Lisa, someone in your group had a timer on their toothbrush. Yeah, so I have an electric toothbrush. I've had a lot of dental problems that has a 2-minute timer. So it actually stops at 2 minutes. So I know I have to keep going until the toothbrush goes off. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, resources matter. And so you could set it on a phone, look at a watch, or the toothbrush could have a timer. So Kimberly, the 2-minute timer on the electric toothbrush takes so long sometimes. Yeah, it can feel like forever, absolutely. So right, so thinking about it's hard to judge timing and things like that. So what type of toothbrush somebody has absolutely matters. Absolutely. Okay, so this is just an example of how things can be broken down in different ways, visually, in terms of the different types of information, right? Do you include, and sometimes we forget, like I brush my tongue, but I didn't initially think about brushing my tongue, right? Thinking about the type of, does somebody have running water that they can use to put inside their mouth? Is there clean running water or places that all those type of things are just things that you don't necessarily think about. So Earl, thank you so much for bringing this up. Thinking about the client's dental state, missing teeth, dentures, bleeding gums, absolutely. So this matters in terms of things that somebody might need to do when cleaning their teeth. Do they need to clean anything out if they have dentures, right? That could be part of the toothbrushing process, right? Cleaning dentures and things like that. So that's also really important to bring up. Thank you so much, Earl. So overall, when skills teaching, I just want to highlight a couple of things. it's hard to break down overlearned skills like brushing your teeth, right? So if you've been brushing your teeth independently for most of your life, right, you're probably on autopilot when you're doing it. And so anything like that with the ADLs, it's just hard to break down things into steps. Again, because you're doing it, multiple times a day, you're on autopilot. I don't think what angle is my toothbrush, am I getting every side? I kind of, I'm listening to a podcast, I'm in my own world, and I'm not necessarily paying attention to what I'm doing. And so when learning new skills, they need continuity, repetition, and a high level of detail, scale to what knowledge they already have. And so thinking about having that continuity, always having the same order. And so, for example, you might have two staff that are teaching someone to brush their teeth, but one person might say, wet your toothbrush first and then put the toothpaste on, or put the toothpaste on and then wet your toothbrush. That might be really confusing to someone, right? What order do you do things? Maybe they, put the toothpaste on and then the toothpaste always falls off, right? But they keep brushing their teeth, and so they're brushing their teeth with no toothpaste. Has anyone seen that before, right? So thinking about that in terms of what works best for the individual and staying solid and repeating that over and over again. Also, how you perform the skill depends on the context you'll use it. And this came up in the discussion in a really wonderful way about electric toothbrushes, about having potable water, about having a place to actually do it, in terms of thinking about, right? And you can think about teeth as resources, right? What is your situation in terms of dentures, missing teeth? What do you need to be focusing on when you're doing that dental care, right? Are you home or not? What supplies do you have? What is your physical environment? Really important to think about. And also, everyone does things differently. So it's important to stay consistent when teaching with a written list, a shared clip, and then providing the client with a breakdown of steps. So whether that's having pictures or the steps like in the bathroom where the person's actually doing it, finding a way to display that, right? Making sure that the person has access to the steps in a way that makes sense to them, and then making sure that that helps when they're actually doing the activity. Okay, so thank you all for participating and discussing this. Again, skills teaching, it was really wonderful to hear that a lot of you are already doing this. We just wanted to share the template and work on breaking something down to get into some of these things, because as people mentioned in groups, people bring things up that you were not thinking about electric toothbrushes. Earl just brought up, I wasn't even thinking about dentures, but I should have been, right? So other people bring things into this, right? And it's really important. That's why it's good and collaborative to be doing the breakdown with the individual. So now we're going to shift towards talking about some other empirically supported practices. And we're going to start with motivational enhancement strategies. These are derived from motivational interviewing. So in New Jersey, a lot of Medicaid fee-for-service rehabilitation programs in many states focus on a number of evidence-supported practices that are derived from motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, sorry, I'm tripping over that word today, I don't know why, and illness management and recovery. And so we do a version of this in New Jersey. And so this is kind of common support for rehabilitative services. And so these enhancements are working at exploring and resolving ambivalence to achieve lasting behavioral change. And the focus on ambivalence is incredibly important, because the idea is if there's a behavior that perhaps doctors, staff think is unhealthy, unproductive, the individual has to be ambivalent about it to work towards change, right? And that ambivalence could be, for example, with smoking, it could be, I don't like how much it costs. I don't like the health. I'm worried about lung cancer. I had an uncle die of lung cancer. But then there's also things that the person likes about it, right? It could be around social situations and having things to do, maybe taking breaks while working, maybe after group, it's something to do with people. Like all of these things, people have, right? It's easy to continue doing behaviors you're doing, but there might be parts of it that the person doesn't like. And those places are where it's good to have the person explore ambivalence. And that's where motivational enhancement strategies are. They're not to tell people to make changes, but trying to evoke and develop people's own dissonance between what they're doing and where they want to be in terms of goals. And so think about a change that you're ambivalent about making. Is there a change that anybody that there's a behavior you do that you don't particularly like, something you feel comfortable sharing, that you're ambivalent about making, right? Something that you're doing, you're not sure you want to continue doing. And this is the process by which you would start to when talking to people, when engaging, when assessing, you would start to see this ambivalence in the way that people talk. So, does anyone have an example of a behavior that you're ambivalent about? I can share, and I brought up toothbrushing. I have some serious dental problems, and part of it is the amount of sugar that I eat. And so every year I'm ambivalent about how much sugar I eat. It's really bad for my teeth, but I haven't made a change about it. But I definitely have ambivalence about it, but not enough to make an actual reasonable change about it, right? And that's something that if I were receiving services, right, and thinking about my health, that's a place where a broader conversation, I'm going to talk about a couple of resources to explore these things. That's where, you know, a discussion could be had to explore, well, what do I get from having a lot of sugar, and what might be positive about me making a change. So anyone have an example of something you're ambivalent about making a change for or change about? And I just like to apologize. I'm misspeaking quite a bit today. What's going on? Okay, the heat. Yeah, changing diet. Absolutely. And a lot of people are ambivalent about what they eat, eating healthier, eating less. Absolutely. And so the idea of like knowing like I could be eating less or I could be eating healthier, but I'm not, but there's things I like about it, there's things I don't like about it, that's ambivalence. Now, if somebody, let's say, is like, no, I like what I eat, I like how much I eat, but right, doctors are like, no, you're overweight, you should change what you eat, that's not ambivalence, right? So if somebody is saying, no, I like smoking, no, I like eating as much as I do, I like eating as much sugar, the person is not ambivalent. Right. And so I think it's really important, and this is something in community support services, listening to people about what they're actually like ambivalent about versus not, because there's certain things people don't want to change, right? There's certain things I'm sure that you do that are unhealthy and unproductive. You don't want to change. The same with me. And the thing is, right, looking for where someone's ambivalent to make changes. House agreement to put the phone down, exercise more, whether or not you want to exercise. Absolutely. So those are all things that you're saying you're ambivalent about that you could work on. Again, if you're like, I don't want to quit smoking, like that's not something that you're ambivalent about. And so I'm going to share a couple of motivational strategies. The first is to explore ambivalence by discussing the pros and cons of a behavior. So that could be the pros and cons of exercising more. That could be about the pros and cons of eating healthier, eating less. And so Earl's going to share this in the chat, the decisional balance. It's not just pro and con, it's the pro and con of making a change and not making a change. So it's a 4-part quadrant. So this is the decisional balance matrix. And you want to end with, since there are 4 quadrants, it's good to end with the quadrant that's what is the positive thing about making the change, because the goal is to help support people towards being excited and wanting to make a change. So this is something that can be the point of discussion. So that's the decisional balance. Another piece, and this came up in the chat, I'm not sure who brought it up, I can't remember, but exploring ambivalence using open-ended questions. And a very common motivational strategy, a conversational strategy, is OARS, which is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarization. And those are ways to help people to basically asking open-ended questions in order that people can think more about questions that help people to think about what they're doing, what does it gain them, what is a positive thing, basically just eliciting people to think more about the behavior. So, and Earl put both of those into the chat. So one again is a decisional balance, one is OARS. There's lots of different strategies and techniques and worksheets. I just wanted to highlight 2 here, and I hope that those are helpful. And so, for example, and again, an open-ended question is a question that So can you explain that? You say you want this, but continue to engage in this, help me understand. Yeah, that's a perfect example of an open-ended question. Okay, so I'm hearing you say this, you're reflecting something back. So can you tell me a little bit more about, can you tell me a little bit more about what's happening? You're saying that you want to do this, but continue to engage in the behavior. So can you tell me a little bit about the behavior, why you're engaging in it, right? So that tell me a little bit more. So you're inviting somebody to tell you more, and you're not giving them the answer in the question. You're not just asking for yes, no. You're just, and thinking about reflecting what you're hearing from them and then asking to learn more. That's a really wonderful example. So for a client ambivalent about preparing for an apartment interview, what's an open-ended question you can ask, right? So the person's like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna look at an apartment, but I'm not sure that I want to. So they're ambivalent, and it's possible maybe they've missed appointments in the past. There's some support in the chat, which is wonderful to see. So thinking about if someone's ambivalent, they've maybe missed apartment interviews before, what's a question you could ask? So somebody who's ambivalent about seeing apartments, maybe has missed appointments in the past, what's a question that's open-ended, that's curious, right? A curious question about the interview process, about what's going on for them. What's a question you could ask? So Linda, what would it look like if you were to live in this home? Okay, so asking them about, right, what it would look like. How could they imagine this, right? And you could see if there's things they're concerned about, right? If there's something about fear or uncertainty, that might come out to that. Or they might be, that might motivate them to actually want to see the apartment, the things they might enjoy. So Jen, what are you looking to find in an apartment? Yeah, so tell me a little bit more. So maybe the apartments they've been looking at, right, you'll see like that's not actually what they're looking for in terms of location. Maybe there's something about it's not close enough to public transit or family. So Jess, are you certain that an apartment will work for you? Okay, so that's more asking about like, is independent living, and tell me more about your ideas of independent living in an environment. How do you see yourself, do you see yourself in an independent living environment? So just getting a sense of like, what does independent living mean to them, right? And so thinking about asking that in a little bit more of an open-ended way to tell them about independent living in an apartment and their ideas about it. Yeah, because some of the concerns might come out in that way. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So those are ways to elicit a discussion about where somebody is in their ambivalence. It's not telling someone what to do, but it's asking somebody to think more about and to share about what's going on, right? Because somebody not turning up, somebody not following through on something, there's some type of ambivalence happening. And so this is a way. Yeah. So I think your name is Carl. I'm sorry, Seymour. So tell me about the concerns you have living on your own. Absolutely. And tell me is a wonderful way for an open-ended question. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Carl. Yeah, it's hard with some of the Zoom names. It doesn't say, it just has some of the fronts of your emails. So wonderful. Right, so tell me more about is a really wonderful way to ask an open-ended question. So the next piece that we're going to talk about, so Susan, using a reflection. Yeah, so once you ask that question, you can reflect back. What I hear you saying is absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So in addition to motivational enhancements, it's written into the foundational community support documents that cognitive behavioral techniques are one of the evidence-based or empirically supported practices that can be used in foundational community supports. And so these are techniques and strategies to modify behavior and for cognitive restructuring. Oh, so Carl, yes, about cognitive behavioral. Yeah, so those can be absolutely some errors, thinking about all or nothing, thinking, mind reading. You are jumping ahead in a way. So we're going to talk about cognitive restructuring in a moment. Those are exactly examples of ways that people may have kind of errors in thinking, in ways that may make it hard to make changes, or bring up fear or uncertainty or anxiety. So the goal of cognitive behavioral techniques is to change unhealthy or unproductive thoughts and behaviors, right? And so to think about how to change behavior, change thoughts, right? And thoughts precede behaviors always. And so thinking about those thoughts and behaviors that are unhealthy or unproductive. And it's important to think that the person also needs to, thinking about ambivalence, the person needs to, and this is more action oriented than motivational enhancement, the person needs to think that the behaviors or thoughts are unhealthy or unproductive and want to change them. So this is for somebody who has a goal, who has behaviors they want to change. And these are strategies to help people to make changes that they are committed to making. And so thinking about unhealthy or unproductive thoughts and behaviors. So if you have somebody, let's say, who's pre-diabetic or diabetic and needs to lower their blood sugar, but commonly binges after 8 p.m., right? That's unhealthy and unproductive, right? And so thinking about what can be done to modify behavior, maybe it's about setting a rule not to eat after 8 p.m. Maybe it's about having a replacement, right? What is it to change about behavior, and how can you change thoughts that are maybe contributing to binging? And so thinking about that, it's really important to, again, think about these are behaviors that the person doesn't want, because it's possible that you want to make a change, but you're still having difficulty changing your thoughts and behaviors. And again, this is oriented towards people ready to make a change, committed to the goal that they're working on to change thoughts and behaviors. So examples of CBT. So if you have a goal, if someone has a goal to take medication every day, one example that could support that, a cognitive behavioral technique, is behavior tailoring, which is about changing a routine or environment, which could be the use of alarms to support taking medication. And so thinking about ways in which the environment, one's routine can be altered, really important for someone who wants to make a change. Because somebody may want to take their medication, but doesn't remember. And, in the middle of the night is like, oh, I didn't take my medication. And so thinking about how to help them do that by changing their environment or routine. And Earl's going to share an example of some cognitive behavioral for taking medication, some tips and strategies in the chat. Thank you, Earl. And then cognitive restructuring of unproductive fears about taking medication by catching, checking, changing the thought. And this goes back to what Carl was saying about thinking errors all or nothing. And so this worksheet that Earl is going to put into the chat box is called Catch It, Check It, Change It. And so you catch thoughts. And so you may, for example, have a fear that taking medication is going to change who you are, make you a zombie. Then you catch that thought. What is the thought? What are the feelings? And then you check it. And this is what Carl is talking about in terms of thinking about, am I catastrophizing? Am I having all or nothing thinking? Is this really what's going to happen? And then you change the thought to be more realistic. So you think about, for example, okay, what maybe medication changes my mood, maybe it slows down my thinking, but there's also a lot of benefits, right? And so weighing those things instead of being like, oh, it's all or nothing, right? I take the medication, I'm not going to be myself. Well, that isn't entirely true. And so this is a tool that can be used all together, or it can be used in pieces. And so, for example, just catching thoughts can be a really wonderful skill for people that can build up to catching, checking, and changing. And so having people catch thoughts that are unhealthy or unproductive and journal those thoughts, that could be a step, and the associated feelings. And this can be something that can be done because a lot of people do this naturally, right? And this is a skill that people have internalized. And this is taking that skill of catching thoughts, negative self-talk, things that are immobilizing that make it hard to change behavior. And having that process, you can do it together, give it for somebody to try on their own. And so this is a really nice tool for cognitive restructuring. And so that is available there to view and download, both the behavior tailoring and Catch It, Check It, Change It. So for a client who wants to shower daily, what is an example of behavior tailoring you could do? So thinking about, you have a client who wants to shower daily. So this is a behavior, a goal that they have that they want to work on. What's an example of behavior tailoring you could do? Again, that's changing the environment or changing a routine. So Lisa, setting a phone alarm, a routine, right? So maybe it's always before, after you brush your teeth, before you eat. So putting it in terms of an order that happens in someone's day, having an alarm that maybe pops up and they know that that's time to take a shower. Absolutely. Yeah, working to identify a time. Use a to-do list. Yeah, it could be something that you check off, a physical list, a list on a phone. And again, it really depends. Some people, a routine might be better. They don't want a list to check off, but they want to do things in an order. Again, that's just the preference of the individual. You want this to be tailored. Oh, so Richard, would awareness of one's body odor be one? Well, that's a question, because it's really about what you're doing to help support somebody. So if there's something in the environment that alerts somebody to their body odor, then that might be something, right? If there's some alert to body odor, but it's really thinking about the environment and how the environment can be used. It could perhaps be something about a routine. If you smell like this, then you do that. So maybe that could be built into a routine. So Heather, finding things that reinforce the benefit of taking a shower. Yeah, so maybe thinking about, right, after you take a shower, something nice that can be done, maybe something social. Putting out a towel, soap, and undergarments to trigger the thought. Yeah, sometimes I used to do this when I worked really early. I would lay everything out. So I'd have my clothing in a pile. I'd have my towel, like everything ready to go in the morning. So sometimes staging those things can be helpful. Absolutely. So these are all things to think about where things can be, how things can be ordered. For me personally, routine is incredibly important. So I know, like, when I wake up, I make coffee, I change my cat's litter, I put food and water out. Like, there's things that I do in a specific order every morning before I do anything for myself. And that's just a way of keeping me on track, again, because I'm tired sometimes in the morning. And that's a way that can be really powerful, like that routine. Some people like checklists. Again, it really does depend on the individual. So Cameron, cleaning the bathrooms, they have more comfortable showering. Yeah, so thinking about how to make the bathroom maybe cleaner, more orderly, having spaces for things, maybe hooks for a towel. Absolutely, so setting up the environment in a way. I know sometimes bathrooms don't have hooks, and thinking about where does the towel go when it's drying, that can be kind of confusing and make it hard to have clean things to use. So that's a really wonderful point, Cameron. So Heather used to have a patient who had a lot of trauma history and didn't like to take off his clothes, but he did like to go out to breakfast. We had a plan for him to leave his money in the office safe, so he couldn't get it unless he showered. Okay, so that's encouraging it through, that's interesting. So you were tailoring his behavior because you identified, like, you were trying to reinforce it with breakfast. And so, okay, so that seems like you're using a little bit of, you're trying to do a little bit of negative reinforcement that until, or positive reinforcement. So the person does something and then they get access to money. So that's a way, that's another CBT strategy, positively reinforcing behavior. And did that work, Heather, where that the showering was access to the money to be able to get clothing? It's also important to think about, right, there may be things that the person needs to work on to work up to things, especially you're mentioning a trauma history. So thinking about, is this something that needs to be worked up to? Are there accommodations? Also really important. Thanks for bringing that up. So Andrew, use a 3-minute timer that just needs resetting. So 3 minutes for the teeth and face, 3 minutes to dress, 3 minutes to assemble stuff. Just an example of a routine. So Heather, you couldn't really withhold your money if you wanted to, but it was motivating to him. He had pretty significant schizophrenia symptoms, and the shower task was hard. And I do think this question about buy-in, because there's some people, right, you really can't withhold people's money, but if the person is okay with it, right, saying like, okay, the person has buy-in and wants to shower but is having difficulty with it, then that might be something they agree to make it an extra step they need to do to encourage it. Oh, Richard, you were asking if awareness is part of changing behavior. Absolutely. Like awareness in terms of the need to. So cognitive behavioral techniques like behavior tailoring is once somebody's aware and like has buy-in to change the behavior. I would say more about like thinking about exploring is more with motivational enhancement. This is where somebody is ready to make a change, knows that there's a problem, and is just looking to change behavior. Yeah, so Heather, he was on board and eventually started to shower more independently, but it took a long time, which is wonderful to hear that it happened and that there was patience in building towards it and that he was on board. And that's really important for these CBT techniques, that the person is on board to make the change. So absolutely, Richard, awareness is important, but making sure that that is a precondition for this. Okay. And the last thing we're going to talk about is illness management and recovery, or IMR. And so this is about symptom monitoring, often self-monitoring and self-management that includes manualized IMR, the SAMHSA IMR toolkit. This is not the only form of IMR, but it is something that is recommended and has a lot of wonderful resources. And I'm going to have a poll just to see if people are familiar with the SAMHSA toolkit. So are you familiar with the SAMHSA IMR toolkit? Yes. You've used it, yes, you've heard of it, or no? We'll see. I just added this poll right before we did it because I realized I opened it up and I can show you if a lot of people haven't seen it before. So I'm going to leave this open for another 10 seconds if anybody else wants to vote. So again, illness management recovery, someone learning about, and I'll open this here, someone is being educated about their mental illness, their medication, thinking about side effects and symptoms, also medication management skills. It's much more than this. It can be about substance use also. So thinking about knowledge, tools around self-management, all of that is illness management recovery. So I am going to end the polling now. So it seems like most of you who responded haven't heard of the SAMHSA toolkit. So I think I'm going to show you just for a moment about what it is. It's a free guide. It's used very heavily in the state hospital system while people are working towards discharge. And it's broken down into a number of modules, recovery, symptoms of different mental illnesses, medication, communication skills. So there's lots of different, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. There's lots of different resources here. So let's start sharing this. So this is the toolkit. It is 361 pages and it's a guide and handouts. And you can see here, it's broken down into topics. And so write practical facts about mental illnesses, specifically schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, building social supports, using medication, and then it breaks things down into antipsychotic medications, mood stabilizers. And so it has some really wonderful information. It also has practical information for you if, let's say, you don't know a lot about the medications people are taking or want to learn more, if the individual's on new medication and wants to learn more. And so what it does is you can click through and it has an introduction, the goals of the session, and different handouts that are available. It also gives suggestions of pacing if you want to do the entire section. So what's wonderful about this is that you can take it and, for example, over a 6-month period, you can cover the IMR module on practical facts about mental illness. So you can take 6 months and go through this, right? Or you can take some handouts and work on it, more building knowledge on the medication somebody's taking, right? And so you can use this as standalone handouts, as information for yourself, or something that you can go through with the individual over the course of an ISP period, if there's something people need. And so it's got suggestions of educational strategies, cognitive behavioral strategies, homework strategies and suggestions. And so this has, for example, review questions, and I want to show you some examples of handouts. lots of information. So for example, this is an example of a handout, what causes mental illness, right? What are explanations you've heard for mental illnesses? What's your experience with relapse? So it has information, things that the person can be asked or fill in, right? So this can be a discussion. It can be something that somebody's handed and actually work on. And so there's a lot of different ways this can be used. So does anyone have any questions about this toolkit? Earl put the links into the chat. So this is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration IMR toolkit. It's available for everybody. Again, it's clickable through, and it's, again, information for you, the individual. I would check with individuals, especially if they've been in state hospitals, if they've done any of these modules, but it is really great services. It is great information and resources. Which should be tailored. Some people don't like handouts, but you could use questions. They have a lot of open-ended questions and information you can use, even if you never give anyone a handout. So let me stop sharing that. So any other questions about the IMR toolkit? And again, that toolkit can be downloaded directly from the web. So looking at the toolkit, thinking about education about mental illnesses and mental illness management and recovery, what do you actually do of this, right? So what illness management and recovery do you use? Is it some of you mentioned that you use the toolkit? Is there something specific you use from it? Is there a resource you like to use? A lot of people use recovery action planning, wellness and recovery action planning, or WRAP, right? There's lots of different resources, lots of toolkits, lots of handouts. Is there something that you like to use or that you commonly use in terms of illness management and recovery? Because as Heather mentioned, she was working with somebody who was really symptomatic, right? Who was schizophrenic and really symptomatic. And so thinking about, right, is that an issue of what medication the person's on, about taking medication, finding the right dosage, right? Thinking about how to reduce symptoms and work towards recovery, really important. So, and the toolkit can be a resource, but again, it'd be wonderful to hear if there are other resources that you're using. Give people just a moment to respond. Okay, so continue to think about that, and if anybody wants to share, please do that. What I'm going to ask you to do now is think about a specific goal and how to match these interventions with that goal. So Earl is going to share in the chat a list of all the interventions we've talked about: skills teaching, motivational enhancements, cognitive behavioral techniques, and illness management recovery. So if you need a refresher, there's going to be a document that you can save and download. It has all the links that I shared earlier. So take a look at that, and I'm going to give you a goal and ask you to think about some interventions. What's actually an objective? So in the next 6 months, Jose will apply for one job. So you have an objective that in 6 months, he will apply for at least one job. And so I want you to think about possible interventions. There's not a lot of information, so you can imagine what you want in terms of Jose's interest, motivation, but what's a motivational enhancement you could use to help Jose apply for a job, a skill teaching step, what's something you could do, whether it's modeling, having him try something, breaking down steps, or a cognitive behavioral technique, all towards supporting Jose to apply for one job. So I'm just going to put this into the chat in the interest of time. So here is the document with all the evidence-based practices that I discussed. So skills teaching, motivational enhancements, and cognitive behavioral techniques. So if you want to take a look at that, take a moment to think about, right, what is a possible intervention for Jose who wants to apply for a job. So take a moment to look back at the practices and then think about this goal. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to just think about how you could apply some of these practices. So Lisa, you're saying money is motivation. Right, so that's something. So interestingly, think about what's a strategy we talked about or a different motivational strategy to help work towards applying for a job. So think about some of the motivational enhancement strategies. So Sharon, I deal with those that with mental health for over 40 years, have been given every med, and now they refuse all services because they have physically gone downhill due to all the meds. How do you motivate this population? And so Sharon, you're bringing a really important, these medications, some of them really have long-lasting side effects. And if people have been heavily, I would say, over-medicated for a long time, they may have incredibly painful side effects that make experiencing life or quality of life significantly lower than if they hadn't been taking these medications for 40 years. And this is a problem in, institutionalization, that a lot of people are given more meds than perhaps they need. And so that's something to think about in terms of, that is really challenging. This is where you might use a motivational enhancement to just discuss or open-ended questions to talk with them, right? Because these are not mandated services. People have, the right to take medication or not take medication in the community. And so thinking about how to explore with the person, right? Like, what are the pros and cons, right? Maybe the person gets reinstitutionalized if they don't take their medication. Like, so maybe thinking about a decisional balance matrix, right? If they're taking their medication, but they don't want to, they're ambivalent about it, just exploring with them, right? There is no magic bullet to getting somebody to take their medication, right? Especially when there's significant side effects. So that's a really wonderful and important point, Sharon. Yeah, so what are some examples of applying for a job? What's a motivational enhancement? If he's not sure he wants to apply for a job, what's something that can be done? It's good to hear that she's doing better, Sharon. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, it's important not to downplay the side effects of medications and the effects of being on medications for a long time. So it's really important to listen and hear what people are saying about that. So I do feel like there's sometimes this narrative of just take the medication, but the question of why are people on so many medications? How did they get on them? So Richard, ask him if he wants something. Okay, so open-ended questions, right? Just ask Jose if he wants something. Absolutely, thank you, Richard. So Cameron, identify what he might do with money if he earns from his employment. Right, so thinking about, right, and exploring that with him, that could be a discussion and open-ended questions about what the money might mean to him. Lisa, Jose needs to explore what he's passionate about and his skills might be, so that sounds again like you're exploring through open-ended questions using ORs. Yeah, Sharon, I didn't give you a goal. And so, right, what is the goal? It might be in order to save money to move into an apartment, right? And so maybe it's a goal around finding stable housing or to move into a different apartment. That's a great question. You don't have a goal, and the goal absolutely matters in terms of motivation. So Alan, to make a game to apply for their dream job to the best of their ability. So you're focusing a lot on motivation, understanding. These are really important things going in. So these are all motivational enhancements, right? And so thinking about skills teaching might be, and this was mentioned earlier, this would be more concrete. So once the person explores, is sure what job they want to apply to, then you would move on to skills teaching, breaking down steps, modeling. And then once somebody's working towards that, then thinking about, for example, tailoring behavior, right? So thinking about, right, do they have a routine of when they're applying for jobs or where their resources are or when they go to the library to use the computer, right? All of those things. So thinking about, and I really like how everyone's focusing on motivation and understanding, and then you would move more into skills teaching and cognitive behavioral techniques. So I hope that this discussion has been helpful. I'm going to ask Earl to share the evaluation, and please If you can fill that out, it's incredibly helpful. Earl's going to be presenting next week. It's really important information for us to have. I'm going to tell you about the next training. So give me one more minute and we're going to reshare the presentation. So next week, so please complete the evaluation, which is in the chat now. But next time is going to be the last of the 6 trainings, which is going to be on providing and documenting services. This is going to be about progress notes and about progress note writing, intentional services, wonderful information that my colleague who's been helping me today, Earl, is going to be presenting. But what we're going to ask you to do is for this next training, try the skills training template or have somebody else, if you're supervising someone who does skills teaching, have them try using the skills teaching template. And I'm going to have Earl re-put that into the chat, the skills teaching template. I'm also going to re-put today's training, the presentation, so you can download this presentation that you just saw and put that and save it. It's also going to be sent out by the Healthcare Authority of Washington State, so you should look out for that email with the recording and the presentation. I'm also going to re-put, since it is not here, the evaluation just one more time. So the presentation, the evaluation, and the skills teaching template. So in the presentation, all the links that are hyperlinked here, like skills teaching template, is in the presentation. So if you missed anything, you can get it by clicking in the presentation that we put into the chat. You can also right now download those 3 dots to the right. You can download the chat if that's helpful to you. So you'll have all the links in the discussion in the chat. But I wanted to say that I appreciate everyone's attention and participation. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I'm here to answer any questions. And I would like to really implore you to do the chat, to do the evaluation. It's incredibly helpful to us.